So here we are with the 6th episode in this epic series. So are they going to be able to keep up with the intense quality of last week? Or are they going to fall back into the mediocrity of the week prior? I don't know, but I do know that last week, apparently, I forgot to talk about the Brute at the end of the episode. And yeah, you guys let me know all about that. Episode 6, Solace, is brought to us by director Jonathan Libson and stars Pablo Schreiber, Natasha McKellen, and Charlie Murphy. Survivors of the battle with the Covenant return to Reach. John confronts Dr. Halsey and her lies. The new prisoner seems to know John better than he knows himself. And the mysterious artifact shows John something startling. So this episode picks up right where last week's left off. We've got the aftermath of the big battle that happened in the end of last episode. Everybody's arrived back on Reach and they all look pretty demoralized because they just kind of had their asses kicked by the Covenant. It seems like things are really starting to come to a head now, especially with the Chief. We see him walking through the hallway and he just kind of starts to break down at one point. He starts to get angry and show more emotion than he has in the past. Now he reels that shit in pretty quick, but you can tell that something's up. Something is starting to break him down. While Dr. Halsey's being debriefed about what happened on Iridius, Master Chief walks in and tells the interviewer to just get the hell out. He's got some shit to talk to her about. And at this point is when Chief just straight up tells her, look, stop lying to me, tell me the truth, and that's what she does. She lets him know how everything went down when they were kids and why she did it. Pretty much everything that they have always thought was bullshit. Their parents weren't involved in accidents and all that. No, they were kidnapped from their homes and Flash clones were left in their place that would die a few days later. She was able to identify young children that needed to be under the age of 6 that could be put into this new program, the Spartan program, to run these terrible tests and experiments on to make the Spartan. And yeah, that's pretty much the way it is in the actual Halo lore in the video games. That's how things went down. Halsey is kind of a monster. She's done some really fucked up things in the past. I'm happy to see that they're finally exploring this within the show. They're actually going down that road that's not a very nice road. It's a very unpleasant subject. But I'm also happy to see that they're not just straight up vilifying Halsey. They do acknowledge that she has done some great things. Her work, the experiments that she's done, regardless of how terrible they are, have led to some great things happening in the universe. She has effectively saved a whole lot of lives. Now granted, that wasn't the expense of a few lives, but it's kind of like the many over the few. And like I said in the previous review, that is one of the things that makes Halsey such an interesting character, because she's not all just black and white bad. She's willing to do some really fucked up things to get to her end game, but it's not really that she's evil or bad. She just has a singular vision. She wants to get to this thing that she has put her mind to, and she doesn't really care what gets in her way. And this may make for a very unlikable character, but it also makes for a very interesting character. So once that cat's out of the bag, the UNSC decide to take the Spartan project from Dr. Halsey and hand it over to her daughter, Miranda Keyes. So Halsey's getting kicked out, but apparently she's gonna get a secret lab where she can do whatever experiments she wants in private. But of course she loses all access to the Spartans, the Spartan program, and the artifacts. We do find though that she still has access to Cortana, and Cortana has access to the lab where Miranda is running her tests now, so she's still got a little bit of that inside track. Now the Chief doesn't just interrogate Dr. Halsey, he also interrogates Mackey. If you remember, she showed up at the end of the last episode. They dropped her out of the Covenant ship as if she was some type of prisoner. And honestly, I was kind of surprised the way that these interactions went down. For the most part, it seems like she's telling the truth. I don't think she's really letting on what her true allegiance is, but she's telling them straight up, yeah, I've lived with the Covenant for years and years since I was a child. They call me a blessed one. I can touch these artifacts. I am like you. There's not much she's not telling him, with the exception of, I've got a little mini fucking sword in my finger and I'm here to kill everybody. She's trying to convince John to kind of let her in, for them to team up and they can do great things. Now a little while after this, the Chief goes and locks Halsey inside of one of her labs and starts deactivating some of the fail-safes within this scientific lab area. He explains to Cortana that there is a fail-safe that doesn't operate properly, and he has now activated it, and in about like 30 seconds, The lab that Dr. Halsey in is going to be flooded with the radiation that'll kill him. He tells Cortana the only way that you're going to get this to stop is you need to take me over. And she says, I can't take you over. He's like, I don't believe you. You shut me off that day. She said, that's all I can do. I can't take you over. You need to stop this. And he goes on and on about how I don't believe you, and the timer comes down, and right before it hits 0, he yanks the door open and yanks Dr. Halsey out and tells her, I just needed to know the limits of your AI. This is actually a pretty cool scene, and I like the way that they presented it. It showed that John wasn't fucking around anymore. Now, throughout the episode, apparently John's health is really declining since he started interacting with the artifacts. And McKay notices this and says, you know what? It's because you're fighting against it. That's what happened to me when I first started interacting with the artifacts. But once I let go and just kind of let it have its way with me, things got better. I all of a sudden was able to see what it was trying to show me. So eventually that is what the chief decides to do. He gets Miranda to monitor him, and he just goes in and just like grabs the artifact and goes all in on it. Interestingly enough, when everything starts to take hold of him and he starts kind of going all orgasmic and seeing all these visions, McKay does as well. She's not in the same room, but she is at the same base. Apparently just being in the vicinity of this thing can send her off into some type of trance. The chief starts to see some really horrific visions from his past and just all kinds of flashbacks and all kinds of stuff until finally, apparently he just lets go and lets the artifact take over, and a calm comes over him. And as the chief comes to, he sees Mackie. And not just that, but they're no longer in the UNSC base. As the camera pans around, we see that they're actually on one of the Halo rings. This being the first time that we've seen the Halo rings in this show. They approach one another and stare longingly at each other and then wake up, and apparently they are still at the UNSC base and all that was happening in their head. And that's where the episode ends, and I gotta say that while there's not a lot of action, really any action for the most part in this episode, it was still a really interesting episode. Now the chief spends the vast majority of this episode out of his helmet and armor. That is just what it is. If you have a problem with that, well, you gotta come to terms with that if you're gonna watch this show. I'm not gonna really go over it anymore, but just know that the vast majority of this episode, he is out of the armor, and it does make sense. I mean, he's back at home base, he's going around doing interviews and things like that. Why would he be in his Master Chief armor? That's about all I'm gonna say on that. Moving on, okay? We know that he takes his shit off in this show, and this episode is no different. While there's very little in the way of action in this episode, there is a lot of story going on here. We get all the backstory about the Spartan program and what happened to John and all the other Spartans when they were kids. Everything with Dr. Halsey is finally coming to a head, and of course, in the end of the episode, we finally get to see a Halo ring. Now, while I enjoyed this episode, I gotta say there was something missing from it, and you really don't notice it until after you've watched the episode. However, even though you don't notice it until after you watch the episode, that doesn't necessarily mean it was missed. And I'm talking about Quan, or Quan and Soren actually. That whole side storyline with Quan and Soren on Madrigal trying to get off planet is just not in this episode at all. They do not even stop in with those two to see what they're doing. This is the first episode in the series thus far that has not included the character of Quan, and while I don't hate that character or anything, I know a lot of people have issues with her, I don't necessarily hate her. I gotta admit, the episode was probably better for it. Hell, what it showed of these two characters, Quan and Soren, in last week's episode was kind of filler anyway. That didn't even need to be there. I really enjoyed last week's episode, but that part of it, that few minutes, we didn't even need. I don't really know what their end game is with Quan. I feel like this character had a place at the beginning of the show, but now doesn't really. Before seeing this show, I had heard about this character and how she was going to be a main character, and people are afraid that the show is going to start focusing on her. I can say this much, no, the show is not focusing on her, but she is still there, and I don't understand why. All the stuff that's going on Madrigal, it doesn't really matter to the central story anymore. I'm not saying the stuff couldn't be interesting, but it doesn't matter to this story. Anytime we transition over to that side story, it's just that. It's a side story. It doesn't affect the main story, so it feels kind of out of place. I don't know what the purpose of Quan and Soren is in the greater scheme of things when it comes to this story. But as of right now, I don't really feel like they have a place, and them not being in this episode at all didn't really bother me any. Now, them ending this episode on us finally seeing the Halo ring was pretty cool. There's not a whole lot that we see here. It's just this one spot. You see the ring go up into the clouds on both sides of these two characters. But the visual visual and the really cool music choice that they had during this scene really sell it all. They make it seem really grand and big and kind of spectral, if you will. I know this is more of just like a shared vision for these two characters, but we will definitely be getting to a Halo at some point in time in this show. I mean, it is called Halo after all. And I do fully expect, unfortunately, that to be like one of the closing moments of the last episode of this season. So I'm feeling pretty confident in that. It was pretty neat to get a little sneak peek at it in this episode. At this point, we've got 2 episodes left in this season, and I feel pretty damn confident that over the course of the next 2 episodes, we are going to see the fall of Reach. All of our main players are on Reach right now. That is where the artifact that everybody wants is. The Covenant's gonna come in there, glass the planet, and that's what's gonna cause Master Chief and our other characters to dart off across the galaxy blindly and end up at the Halo Ring. Hopefully they do it in the Pillar of Autumn. I feel fairly confident that is the way that the next 2 episodes are going to go, more or less. But, you know, even though I am expecting that, if that's what happens, that doesn't mean it couldn't be exciting. That could be really cool to see on screen. And I am really looking forward to seeing that. Now, this week's episode, while it wasn't an action-packed fest like last week's, it was still a really solid episode. This is more of a story beats and information episode, and we got lots of story. We got lots of backstory on characters, we got lots of payoff to some things that have been going on in this show so far, and we can see how things are starting to come together for the final of the season. So yeah, in my opinion, they're still headed in the right direction with the show, and it is absolutely worth checking out this episode. So there it is, guys, my spoiler review of Halo Episode 6, Solace. If you enjoyed and want more content like this, hit that subscribe button and help my little channel grow. If you want to help out the channel, check out my Patreon in the description below and become a jarhead and get some of the awesome benefits that go along with that, like these guys, and possibly join my top tier and become a bad motherfucker like my man Dragon Khan, Marge G, and Silverlock. If you liked what I had to say, give me a like. If not, let me know in the comments below why. And as always, stay sexy, Onyx.
Silver team, on me.
So can we talk about McKay for just a minute? And not McKay the character so much, that's whatever, but this little sword finger energy sword thing she's got going on. What the fuck is that? Am I the only one that looks at that? And I do enjoy this show and this world and this lore, but that shit just looks stupid as hell. I don't mean the actual effect, it's just having this little mini energy sword that comes out of her fucking fingertip. Why? Not just why, but how has nothing picked this thing up yet? No scanners or anything? I mean, this is the future. You've got scanners. We've got scanners nowadays that would pick up on this shit. But she's just walking around in this top secret military base with fucking sword fingers and nobody's picked up on it. They're showing that they are suspect of her and they don't know if they trust her or not, but they haven't like run some type of scans that would pick this shit up. I mean, shit, today you can't walk through an airport with a bottle of shampoo, but this bitch can walk into a fucking top secret base with sword fingers? Come the fuck on, man. That and it just looks fucking stupid.